Your backup plan just failed. The generator is out of fuel. The propane tank is empty. The emergency blankets are doing almost nothing, and you know it. You are sitting in a house that is getting colder by the hour, and every solution the preparedness industry sold you has a deadline built into it. Fuel runs out. Batteries die. Contracts expire. But there is a chemistry that doesn't expire. A powder that costs $3, dissolves in water, and releases heat through a reaction that has been understood for over a century. It has never needed a power grid. It never will. Here's what they didn't tell you. Let's start with what you actually bought. Most people reading this right now have a generator. Maybe it's a 3,500 watt Champion. Maybe it's a Honda EU 2200. You spent anywhere from $400 to $1,200 on it. You have it in the garage or the shed. You feel prepared because of it. You are not prepared. You are one tankful away from being exactly as cold as everyone else on your block. Here is the problem with generators that nobody puts on the box. Gasoline has a shelf life of about 30 days before it starts to degrade. After 30 days, the lighter volatile compounds begin to evaporate. The fuel oxidizes. It develops varnish deposits. In cold weather, that process accelerates. In extreme cold, below -10 Celsius, gasoline's viscosity increases, and the wax components that are always present in pump fuel begin to precipitate out of solution. The fuel gels. It won't flow through a carburetor jet that is measured in microns. Your generator will crank, cycle, and die. You will pull that cord until your shoulder gives out. It will not start, and that's if you stored the fuel correctly, which most people don't. If you used regular pump gas and didn't add a fuel stabilizer within the first week, you already have a problem you don't know about yet. The varnish is already forming on the needle valve seats and the emulsion tube. Your generator is already compromised. It just hasn't told you yet because you haven't needed it yet. Let's say you did everything right. Stabilizer in the tank, fuel rotated every 90 days, fresh gas in a sealed container. You are still on borrowed time. A standard 3,500 watt generator burns roughly a quarter gallon of fuel per hour at half load. At full load, you're looking at closer to half a gallon per hour. A 5-gallon can gives you 10 to 20 hours of runtime. Then it's empty. Then what? You drive to a gas station that has no power. You wait in a line of hundreds of people who made the same calculation you did. Or you don't go anywhere because the roads are impassable, because this is a real grid-down scenario, not a 3-hour outage. Your generator is a machine that converts stored fuel into electricity. When the fuel is gone, it is a very expensive paperweight that weighs 200 pounds. But even while it's running, you have problems that the marketing materials never mentioned. First, noise. A standard open-frame generator produces 70 to 80 decibels at 23 feet. That is the sound of a lawnmower running continuously in a neighborhood that has gone silent because the grid is down. You are broadcasting your location to everyone within a quarter mile. In a stable emergency, that's a minor inconvenience. In a destabilized one, it is a liability that cannot be overstated. Generators are loud by design. The inverter generators are quieter, 50 to 60 decibels, but they cost twice as much and output significantly less power. Second, carbon monoxide. Generators produce CO as a combustion byproduct. CO is colorless, odorless, and kills at concentrations above 150 parts per million over sustained exposure. Every year during major power outages, people die because they ran generators in garages, in basements, in spaces they thought were ventilated enough. FEMA tracks these deaths. The number spikes every single time a major storm or ice event hits a populated area. The generator industry response to this problem is a sticker that says, "Do not operate indoors." The generator still produces the gas. You still have to run it close enough to your home to use it. In winter, in a real emergency, people make desperate decisions. CO doesn't forgive desperate decisions. Third, the supply chain reality. In a localized emergency, a neighborhood outage, a regional ice storm, you can probably get fuel within 24 to 48 hours. In a widespread grid-down event, fuel allocation goes to emergency services, hospitals, and infrastructure repair first. Consumer access gets rationed or cut off entirely. The fuel supply chain depends on electrically powered pumps at refineries and distribution terminals. If the grid is down regionally, fuel stops moving within 72 hours. Your 5-gallon can is not a strategy. It is a 72-hour countdown. Now, let's talk about propane, because that's the other answer the industry sells you. The Mr. Heater Buddy. The Big Macs, the whole ecosystem of portable propane heating. And propane has real advantages over gasoline. It stores indefinitely if the tank is sealed properly. It's cleaner burning. The fuel doesn't gel. But propane introduces a different problem at the temperatures you actually need it most. Liquid propane vaporizes at minus 42 degrees Celsius at standard pressure. So theoretically, it works in extreme cold. In practice, as the temperature drops, the pressure inside the tank drops with it. Below minus 15 Celsius, a standard 20-pound tank loses significant pressure and output drops sharply. Your heater runs weak. At minus 25, the regulator on a standard consumer tank may freeze entirely. The heat source you are depending on fails precisely when you need maximum output. Beyond the chemistry, you have supply dependency. You cannot make propane at home. You cannot refill a 20-pound tank without going somewhere. Your supply is finite and fixed on delivery day. And a 20-pound tank running a 9,000 BTU heater gives you roughly 21 hours of runtime. Less at lower temperatures. Less if the regulator is struggling. The kerosene heater is the third answer, and it deserves the least time because its problems are the most straightforward. Kerosene produces carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. It also produces water vapor, which in a sealed space raises humidity and accelerates structural cold damage. It produces a distinctive odor that permeates everything in the space. Storing kerosene legally and safely requires proper containers and ventilation. And like every other solution in this category, it requires a consumable fuel supply that you cannot produce, cannot restock in a real emergency, and will eventually run out. Here's what every one of these solutions has in common. They are all fuel dependent, every single one. The generator needs gasoline. The propane heater needs propane. The kerosene heater needs kerosene. The entire emergency heating industry is built on selling you a machine and then selling you the fuel to run it indefinitely as long as you need heat. Your emergency is their revenue stream. The machine is the entry point. The fuel is the subscription. And when the subscription ends, when the supply chain breaks, when the roads close, when the tanks run dry, you are left with expensive hardware and no heat. There is a different answer. It doesn't have a motor. It doesn't have a tank. It doesn't need a delivery truck. It needs water. The powder is called calcium chloride. You've seen it before. It is in the orange bags at hardware stores in winter, spread on icy driveways and parking lots. It costs $2 to $4 for a pound bag. It is not marketed as a heat source. It is not sold in the camping aisle or the emergency preparedness section. It sits next to the rock salt, labeled as a de-icer, and most people walk past it without a second thought. That is exactly where the industry wants it to stay. Here is what calcium chloride actually does when you add it to water. The dissolution reaction is exothermic. That word means it releases heat as a product of the chemical process itself. When calcium chloride dissolves, the ionic lattice that holds it together breaks apart. Calcium ions and chloride ions separate and disperse into the water. As they do, they interact with water molecules through a process called hydration. The water molecules orient themselves around each ion, and that reorientation releases energy. That energy is heat. You are not burning anything. You are not running a current through anything. You are dissolving a salt, and physics is giving you heat as a receipt. The enthalpy of dissolution for calcium chloride is approximately negative 81 kilojoules per mole. Negative, in thermodynamic notation, means energy is released to the surroundings. To put that in practical terms, Dissolving 100 grams of calcium chloride in 200 milliliters of water will raise the solution temperature by roughly 30 to 40 degrees Celsius above ambient. Starting from room temperature, you get a solution approaching 60 to 70 degrees Celsius. Starting from a cold room at 5 degrees Celsius, you still get a solution hot enough to burn skin on contact. That heat then radiates outward, into the air, into the container holding it, into the space around it. This is not a marginal effect. This is not a hand-warming novelty. In a sealed or semi-sealed space, a tent, a vehicle interior, a small room with the gaps blocked, a series of these reactions, staged over time using inexpensive containers, can maintain survivable temperatures for hours. Not comfortable temperatures, survivable ones. That distinction matters more than most people realize, because the threshold for survival is much lower than the threshold for comfort. Core body temperature has to fall below 35 degrees Celsius before hypothermia begins. You don't need to be warm. You need to stay above that line. The reaction works at any ambient temperature. It does not require a minimum starting temperature to initiate. In a vehicle that has been sitting at minus 20 Celsius overnight, calcium chloride still dissolves, still releases its energy, still heats the solution and the air around it. The physics do not negotiate with the weather, and the powder itself stores indefinitely. Calcium chloride is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from air, so it must be stored in a sealed container. Properly sealed, a 5-pound bag purchased today will be just as reactive in 15 years. It does not expire. It does not degrade. It does not go stale in a tank. You can stage this reaction using materials you already own. A wide-mouth mason jar, a metal pot, a foil baking pan. You add the powder to water, you cap the container loosely to allow pressure equalization, and you place it in the space you are trying to heat. If you want sustained output over hours, you use multiple containers and stagger the dissolution. If you want concentrated localized heat, warming a sleeping bag interior, heating a small tent, you dissolve a smaller quantity in a sealed bottle and place it at the foot of the bag. Field reports from winter campers using this method document core temperature maintenance at ambient temperatures below minus 15 Celsius. Now here is the question that should be obvious. Why isn't this on every survival product page? Why isn't it in every grid-down preparedness guide? Why isn't Prepared Nation or ReadyWise or any of the major preparedness brands packaging calcium chloride as an emergency heat source and selling it for $40 a kit? Because there is nothing to sell you after the first bag. The chemistry is the product and the chemistry is complete. There is no device that breaks. There is no proprietary fuel formulation. There is no filter to replace, no cartridge to reload, no annual service contract. A single transaction at a hardware store, and you have a heat source with a 15-year shelf life. The preparedness industry is built on recurring revenue. Freeze-dried food has a 25-year shelf life, but you buy new varieties and expand your stockpile. Water filtration has replacement filters. Communication gear gets firmware updates and new model releases. A bag of calcium chloride sitting in a sealed bucket is a solved problem, and solved problems don't generate quarterly earnings calls. The outdoor and emergency preparedness industry spent real money, advertising money, influencer money, retail placement money, making sure you think of heat as something produced by a machine running on fuel. The Camp Chef, the Mr. Heater, the whole ecosystem of branded, fuel-dependent, annually upgraded gear. That ecosystem requires your dependency to function. A chemistry-literate consumer who knows about exothermic dissolution is a consumer who doesn't need the ecosystem. The industry doesn't hate you. It just needs you not to know this. You can buy calcium chloride right now at any hardware store that sells road treatment products. Brands include Dow Flake, OxyChem, and generic store brand de-icer. Check the label. It should list calcium chloride as the primary ingredient, not sodium chloride, which is rock salt and does not produce a significant exothermic reaction. Agricultural supply stores carry it in bulk at lower per-pound cost. Chemical supply retailers carry it in food-grade and technical-grade formulations. You do not need a special grade for heat generation. The hardware store bag works, but generating heat is only half the equation. Generated heat escapes. It moves from where you created it toward every surface that is colder. If you don't understand how to slow that movement, the chemistry is wasted. That's where the second layer of this system comes in. And it costs almost nothing. The emergency blanket in your go bag is probably being used wrong. Most people know it exists. Almost nobody knows the physics behind why it works, which means almost nobody is getting close to its actual performance ceiling. When you understand what a radiant barrier actually does at the molecular level, you stop using it as a wrap and start using it as an architecture. Here is what a radiant barrier actually does. Your body loses heat through three mechanisms simultaneously. Conduction moves heat through direct contact: the floor, the chair, the ground under your sleeping bag. Convection carries heat away through moving air. Every draft, every gap, every breath of cold infiltrating from outside. Radiation is the third mechanism, and it is the one almost nobody thinks about. Your body emits infrared radiation continuously. It doesn't require contact. It doesn't require air movement. You radiate heat directly to every cold surface within line of sight, and those surfaces absorb it. In a cold room, you are a heat lamp, illuminating walls that are stealing your energy at the speed of light. A Mylar emergency blanket reflects that radiation back. The aluminized surface has an emissivity of approximately 0.03, meaning it reflects roughly 97% of incident infrared radiation rather than absorbing it. When you wrap yourself in one, the heat your body radiates hits the Mylar and bounces back towards you. That is the theory. Here is the practice problem. Most people wrap themselves in an emergency blanket like a cape, creating gaps at every edge, allowing convective air movement between the blanket and their body, and defeating the radiant barrier effect almost entirely. A blanket that flaps and breathes is not a radiant barrier. It is a crinkly wind flag. The correct use is architectural. You line the walls of the space you are occupying. You create an enclosure, a tent inside a room, a sleeping area defined by hung Mylar panels. A vehicle interior lined on all four glass surfaces. The goal is to create a zone where every surface your body can radiate to is reflective rather than absorptive. Now your heat stays in the zone. The chemistry from the calcium chloride reaction heats the air. The radiant barrier keeps that heat from escaping to the cold walls, ceiling, and windows around you. The two systems work together. Each one extends the effectiveness of the other. A 5-pack of emergency blankets costs $4 at most outdoor retailers. A single roll of heavy-duty aluminized bubble wrap, marketed as pipe insulation or attic radiant barrier, costs $12 to $20 at a hardware store and covers 25 square feet. That is enough to line a small vehicle interior or create a sleeping enclosure inside a larger room. Installed correctly, it reduces radiant heat loss from that space by a documented 90 to 97%. You have not added a heat source. You have simply stopped throwing away the heat you already generated. That is not a marginal improvement. That is a fundamental change in the thermal equation. The second layer is thermal mass, and it is already in your home. You are not using it. Thermal mass is the property of a material to absorb and store heat and release it slowly over time. Water has the highest specific heat capacity of any common substance, 4,186 joules per kilogram per degree Celsius. What that means practically is that water absorbs enormous amounts of heat before its temperature changes, and it releases that heat slowly as the environment cools around it. Stone, concrete, and brick have lower specific heat capacities, but significant density, which gives them comparable performance in mass. Your home's concrete foundation, its stone fireplace surround, its ceramic tile floors. These are all thermal batteries that most people have never charged intentionally. Here's how you use this. Before a grid down event, or at the earliest possible stage of one, you heat water. Every pot, every container, every mason jar, and stainless bottle you own. You bring it to near boiling if you have any heat source available. You fill containers and distribute them throughout your occupied space. A 5-gallon bucket of 90-degree water contains roughly 1,800 kilojoules of stored thermal energy above a 20-degree ambient baseline. That energy releases over hours as the water slowly equilibrates to room temperature. 10 gallons of hot water, properly distributed in an insulated space behind a radiant barrier, provides meaningful thermal buffering for 4 to 6 hours in moderate cold. It is a battery. You charged it when you had energy. Now it is discharging heat into your space while you sleep. The third layer costs less than $1, and most people have never done it. Air infiltration accounts for 25 to 40% of heat loss in a typical residential structure. Drafts, gaps around door frames, the gap at the bottom of exterior doors, electrical outlets on exterior walls. These are not minor contributors. In a poorly sealed house in a cold climate, you can lose more heat through air infiltration than through the walls themselves. The fix is mechanical and immediate. Plastic sheeting taped over windows with painter's tape, a rolled towel at the base of every exterior door, foam tape pressed into the gap around door frames, electrical outlet gaskets, which cost 50 cents each, installed on every outlet on an exterior wall. This costs under $20 for an entire house and can be done in 2 hours. It does not require a contractor. It does not require tools. It requires understanding that air movement is heat movement, and stopping one stops the other. Now step back and look at what these 3 layers represent together. Exothermic chemistry generates heat without combustion, without electricity, without fuel delivery. A radiant barrier keeps that heat from radiating away to cold surfaces. Thermal mass stores surplus heat and releases it slowly. Air sealing prevents the cold outside from continuously flushing your warm inside air away. Not one of these requires the grid. Not one requires a monthly supply delivery. Not one will fail because a carburetor gummed up or a regulator froze. A person who has mastered these 3 layers can maintain survivable temperatures in a sealed space, at ambient temperatures well below freezing, indefinitely. No generator, no propane, no permission. That is not a survival hack. That is thermodynamic literacy. And the cold weather preparedness industry has spent decades making sure you never needed to develop it, because a thermodynamically literate consumer is a consumer who doesn't need their products. The pattern is identical to every other buried technology. Not illegal, not classified, just kept niche, kept obscure, hidden behind the noise of 1,000 fuel-dependent products, screaming for your attention and your recurring purchase. Here is what this actually costs. A 5-pound bag of calcium chloride, $3. A 5-pack of emergency blankets, $4. Plastic sheeting and tape, $8. Total system, enough to protect a family in a vehicle or a sealed room through a multi-day grid-down cold event, under $20. You can source all of it today from stores that are open right now. The science is not restricted. The materials are not controlled. The only thing that was ever standing between you and thermal independence was knowing this existed. Now you do. What other solutions belong on this list? Drop them in the comments because the more we share, the harder we are to freeze out.